and welcome to a new episode of In the District. Today, we are going to be sitting down with Deputy Speaker and member of New York City Council District 8, Diana Ayala. Join us to learn more about her background work in her current role, happenings in District 8, plus much more. I'm Chris Cumella, and this program is brought to you from BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios at La Centrale in the South Bronx. Deputy Speaker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So, to get started on some background, you are an advocate on issues including housing, gun violence, and senior services. You oversee the people of District 8, including the Concourse, East Harlem, Highbridge, Longwood, Mott Haven, Port Morris, and Randall's Island. That is an incredible feat. So I want to start with, tell us about what the role is of a council member in New York City.
Yeah. I mean, we have many responsibilities, but primarily we are tasked with negotiating the budget with the mayor, creating legislation that, translate into laws that impact New Yorkers every single day. And then we have, I think one of the most important jobs, which is working with our communities, right, and trying to figure out ways to bring in resources to better improve their quality of life. And my experiences were not always pleasant in those spaces, and it inspired me to go to school and really take a leadership role in those spaces. And by accident, I met one person, then met another, and I worked in senior services for a while, and that introduced me to my predecessor, actually, through one of my seniors, and she offered me a position in her newly acquired office, doing constituent services. And so I basically started from the bottom, working, with day-to-day complaints, right, on people that were on the verge of being homeless, residents that were being harassed by their landlords, and individuals that were suffering from domestic violence. So all of those issues were very familiar to me because at some point, in time, unfortunately, I was a product of that, something that I had a lot of experience in. And then I started kind of getting a little bit more interested in doing organizing. And so I started organizing, buildings, and I'm like, no, we're not going to accept this type of treatment in the community. And so when my predecessor left, before she left, when she was term limited, she asked if I would consider running because she, appreciated my style and the commitment to the community.
It's incredible. It really is about the people that you know that bring you into these places and show you new exciting things that you can be a part of. Yeah. And that being said, can you tell us some of the role models that inspired you growing up?
My mother. My mother was a very giving person. She suffered a lot of obstacles. But yeah, she was a champion of all people. And I remember my mother worked in a funeral home, was her last job. And she worked there for many years. And oftentimes they would walk in, my mother was filling out a SNAP application. And I'm like, at the funeral home? She's like, well, they didn't, so she became kind of like an impromptu social worker. So when she wasn't doing her, funeral services work, she was doing social services. And I think that I inherited a lot of my mother's empathy and understanding of, just what people go through on a day-to-day, but the type of things that we're expected to survive without trauma, is really unbelievable. Obviously, my predecessor and a lot of women, I've been very fortunate to have a community of women that have kind of steered me, in the right direction, and I will be forever eternally grateful for them for that.
Incredible.
Yeah.
The Bronx is just such a vibrant, diverse space. I mean, it just seems like everywhere you look, there are different walks of life. Yeah. And as someone who has engaged with the community and seen a lot of them, what are some commonalities that you see among the Bronxites?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of love for the borough. There's a lot of pride, for Bronxites. I live in the Manhattan part of the district now because it's important to note that the district is broken up into two boroughs. So I represent East Harlem and the South Bronx. But I lived in Kingsbridge, West Kingsbridge, Sedgwick for many, many years. I lived in on the Cliff for quite some time. And I think that people, when I first moved here from the Lower East Side, people said, "You're going to the Bronx?" nobody wants to move to the Bronx, and the Bronx is such a beautiful place, and I think that it has it's had a bad rap for a really long time. I think people are starting to realize like that it isn't, that's not the way that it is anymore, and that there's a lot of people here, hardworking people that have lived here their entire lives, who've raised their children here. There's a lot of culture, there's a lot of educational opportunities, and it's just it's a community that I have loved, and it's going to be really hard not to represent it, because I really genuinely love every part of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I'm really glad you said that. There seems to be a hyperfixation about the bad parts, quote unquote, of the borough.
That's right.
And more often than not, that gets inflated and that gets spread around like wildfire.
That's right.
They forget about Arthur Avenue. They forget about the South Bronx, where more social institutions are being put in. And what are some ways that we can just sort of work towards breaking this stigma?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that there's a lot of truth to, in terms of like fair share and equity, in terms of how we redistribute, these social service programs. They're necessary programs, like we need them. And I want to be very clear about that. We have people in our communities that suffer from substance use disorder. We have people in our communities that have mental health issues. We have people in our communities that are not making enough, that are probably still working and not making enough, so they need to, be able to apply for SNAP benefits. And we would want those resources to be as close to the individual as possible. The problem is that historically, those type of sightings have occurred in the South Bronx, and in both parts of my district, I'll say, we have an oversaturation issue. I don't have a problem with shelters. I was in shelter twice, and I hate to think that I was bothering somebody. I was just trying to get a roof over my head because of an unfortunate circumstance that I couldn't prevent. Right? We had a fire in our building. And so, but at the same time, there is a need for more resources, right, in our community. So if you're going to put, all of these programs with people that are very vulnerable and need, a very specific type of social service programming, then we need to see some level of investment in the community as well. How do you mitigate, the extra, foot traffic, the garbage that comes with that, any possible crime-related concerns? Like, how do you, do that in a way that ensures that the community feels safe, because it's a valid point. They're completely right, but I think that it's also stigmatized the type of it's shone a negative light on these type of programs, right? And so you're seeing that a lot with shelters. There's so much pushback. Whenever, God forbid, we say there's a shelter opening, everybody is like hysterical. And historically, my office is right across the street from what used to be a shelter that we were able to turn into permanent housing. I didn't even know that it was a shelter. There's so many shelters in our community that are housing just families that were from here, that for some reason or the other, lost their place to live, and now they're in temporary housing. And so we should be welcoming people and just, but at the same time, continuing to make the argument that, with that fair share, we also need more resources.
And I want to segue into what you're talking about regarding housing. As I understand, you are a strong advocate for affordable housing in New York City, which is often easier said than done. And we'd like to dive into some initiatives that you have worked towards to help make this possible for the Bronxites and the city residents. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, again, being a product of public housing, when I lived in Kingsbridge, I was fortunate enough to live in a project-based Section 8 apartment that allowed me to be able to go to school. It allowed me to take, a job that paid the bare minimums, right, and be able to feed my children. And so I understand the system because I've been in it. I understand the importance of, building, but I also know that affordable housing has a different meaning to many people. We often, we were building a lot of affordable housing, but that affordable housing was really intended to make up for apartments that were destabilized, that were lost to the market. What we haven't been building enough of, and what we do have a dire need for, is subsidized housing, which is completely different. Because those are individuals that even, most of them are working folks, cannot they cannot pay the rents at the rates that we have them now. So one of the things that we were fighting for was the city FEPS expansion, right? When I lived in Undercliff, and I can go on and on about my experiences with things, but when I lived in Undercliff, I at some point I couldn't make rent, and I applied for the Jiggets program, which was kind of like the first rendition of what today, is known as the city FEPS program. And that program was very different because it allowed you to stay in your house if you were on the verge of eviction, as opposed to having to go into shelter and then qualify for a voucher. They would help you there, and that way you wouldn't lose the apartment, and they wouldn't have to pay, the city wouldn't have to pay for me to be in shelter, which to me made so much sense. So we really pushed hard on the expansion of the eligibility rules so that, we are capturing that population as well. Unfortunately, the mayor vetoed, and, we're litigating it in court now, but I think it's important. There has to be a balance in New York City, but we have to be very strategic about what we're building. Are we building enough senior housing? By the year 2030, we will have more seniors in New York City than children in schools, and we're not ready.
Wow, I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that housing insecurity goes hand in hand with food insecurity,
Absolutely.
which you see potently, especially around the
Absolutely.
holidays. We've been out in the streets and we've seen lines of people down blocks waiting for supplies, provisions, turkeys, just anything to get by. What are some ways that you are working towards addressing food insecurity in your district?
Yeah, well, I'm the chair of the General Welfare Committee, and we're going to be having a hearing just on, food insecurity next month. Is really to raise awareness, and there's a real big threat right now, right, in the federal government, potentially cutting billions of dollars that go to SNAP benefits in the city, and that's impactful, because if you look at the lines post pandemic, I mean the food pantry lines have never been longer. There's just so many people that are really in need. And so we've been obviously increasing funding for food pantry, so that we're able to give more people the food that they need, and advocating on the federal level, right, to ensure that those cuts don't go through.
Very insightful. Councilmember, thank you. It's time for us to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to get some final thoughts from Deputy Speaker Diana Ayala. Make sure you stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. We hope you are enjoying today's In the District discussion with Deputy Speaker and member of Council City District 8, Diana Ayala. Councilmember, thank you so much for being here with us still. And I want to kick off this next segment by discussing a topic that is on the minds of many city residents nowadays. Within recent years, New York City has seen an influx of migrants. And while recently the number has been steadily decreasing, there is an installation of a new incoming 2,200 men's migrant shelter on Bruckner Boulevard. And we just want to sort of understand, you have been an advocate for effective but equitable handling of the city migrant influx. And we just want to recap for our audience out there who may not be aware about this initiative. What is the plan for this shelter, which, as we understand, is set to be fully operational by June?
Yeah, I mean, there are folks that are, living there now. So, I mean, at the beginning of the crisis, we were getting thousands of people coming into the city, weekly, and the city was struggling in identifying brick and mortar locations where they could, house hundreds of folks at one time, and it was a public crisis. And we did the same thing happened during COVID pandemic, right? We were looking for, they called me, they said Lincoln Hospital has, all of these folks there that, are unhoused. We would love to open a shelter that I did not allow to open. To be able to house them. And I said, absolutely, because I understood, right, that it was an emergency situation, but I also was able to, articulate that once we didn't need it, we had to close it down. And the same thing has happened with the shelters. And so at that point, in the beginning, they asked all the council members to submit, locations that they thought, could house a large number of folks. And that was one of the locations that I brought up back then. That was about two years ago now. And for whatever reason, the city never used it. And then, you fast forward, they're now consolidating sites because the number of, folks has decreased significantly and continues to decrease. So instead of paying, for 20 sites, it's more cost effective to pay for one, right, that houses this amount of people. So I was not informed that they were going to open the facility. I found out about it, like everyone else. But I wasn't necessarily, I wasn't angry about it because I understood, right, that it's a need. We have a moral and a legal obligation to house, individuals in need of housing in New York City, and that includes people that are not documented. And that is exactly what the city is doing. But I also don't, the space is only transitional. It's not going to be there forever. It's just for the, for the time that we need it, and we anticipate that, it will be closed not too far, in the future, just because the numbers continue to decrease, and that site is not a suitable site for permanent shelter. So we wouldn't be able to transfer it over to the Department of Homeless Services per se, right? So it's just, an emergency situation that needed to be handled, and this is how the city handled it.
Right. We do understand that city officials say this is a temporary
Yes.
shelter site. When I am speaking to some critics out there, including some elected officials, they're saying it's a testament to the South Bronx being treated as a, quote, dumping ground. And they feel as though these allocations should be put into other community services that need it, and other organizations, pharmacies, doctors, transportation.
Yeah.
How do we balance out the community's concerns with moving forward on this process?
I don't think that the two need to be mutually exclusive. I think that, again, we do have a fair share issue, but this is not a permanent site, right? And I think that there's a big difference. In an emergency, we should all be able to chip in. There are communities that are not doing their fair share at all. That is not the case here. I'm very proud of that, because having been a person on the other side of the equation that needed the support, I'm always happy to lend that support within reason. I will say that for most viewers that are concerned about the opening of shelters and programs and services, I have not allowed a single shelter to open in this district since I have been in office, not because I don't believe in them, but because we do have more than our fair share. So I think that we've done a really good job of doing that, but an opportunity was available to the city, and they took it. Unfortunately, I didn't have a say in that, but I'm not objecting to it either.
It's a part of a larger
It's a
effort
part of a
to
larger
improve
effort.
quality
That's
of
right.
life for everybody who lives
That's right.
in the city.
And we will be addressing, as a matter of fact, I'm on the phone with them every day addressing, folks being outside, trying to find, spaces within the facility where folks can congregate. I mean, these are individuals, these are human beings. They don't want to be locked away in a building all day. They would like to come out. They don't have connections here in New York City. So sometimes they do congregate in front of the building. They're talking, they're getting some fresh air, maybe, and so, the intent is not to impose on the community, it's really to offer a temporary solution to folks that are really struggling right now.
Right. And through this process of revitalizing the South Bronx, we know that it goes without saying our borough's children are the bright future of this borough. Are there any particular areas of the educational system that you are looking to improve or ultimately make strides towards change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the biggest challenges that we have in the South Bronx is really the retention of our teachers, and that's because we are literally importing teachers from other states. And You know, there's no place to park. There's like we're not also, you know, we're not considering those factors into the equation, and so they find it difficult to be able to, you know, to stay in the borough, and that, you know, in turn of impacts, right, the larger picture, right, which is the education of our young children. But I think overall, you know, we're doing the best that we can. We've worked really hard to bring in resources into the community through Su Casa, right, bringing more cultural programming. Right now, we're doing we're doing the participatory budgeting process where we allow the community to vote on certain projects, and so we allocated $1 million in capital funds, and the kids are the ones that are deciding how they're going to use the money. So we've been integrating ourselves in the schools and trying to teach civic engagement in a different way, in a way that allows, you know, our children to take some ownership and pride in their communities.
Absolutely. And speaking of pride in our communities, you know, the Bronx is just full of local businesses. I see these mom and pop shops, places that have been around for what seems like decades. We want to see these local businesses continue to thrive in a day where major corporations are filling up every block. And what are some ways that we can continue to support these local businesses here in our borough?
Patronizing them. That's the biggest way. We need to buy from them. We need to be, you know, buying local is really important as we move into a society where we're more, you know, inclined to purchase online, you know, and I do that as well. We also have to be, you know, aware, you know, a little bit more cognizant of the fact that if we're not purchasing from the local, you know, deli, that it may very well close. You know, I just lost my hairdresser, you know, she, you know, unfortunately after the pandemic, they were never able to, you know, recuperate, and you know, they ended up having to close. And they're like the example, you know, one of many examples of small businesses that have suffered in the last few years. So I would say that the biggest thing that we can do for our small businesses is to patronize them.
We can only hope. And I mean, as the city is consistently going through revitalization efforts to bring in either more residents, more business, or both, in your opinion, what is the biggest opportunity or opportunities for the Bronx in these next few years?
So we're doing really good. I think that, you know, we've been bringing in a lot of affordable housing, but really thinking creatively about what else comes with that housing. So, you know, bringing in the possibility for theaters and community spaces, you know, really looking at our gardens and, you know, the landscaping in the community, rethinking how we redevelop the waterfront in a way that allows the community access to that waterfront. Has been something that, you know, I've been really proud of, and, you know, and a lot of it is really due to the tenacity, right, the love for the community that the residents here have shown and you know, guided me through.
Yeah, and you know, this is a larger part of community. We are all about engaging with them. And looking back on your time working for the community, what would you say are some of your biggest accomplishments that you've brought to the field?
Yeah. Wow, in the South Bronx, we've done so much. We've brought in millions of dollars in local improvements to just about every single park and, you know, play space that exists in the district, which I'm really proud of, St. Mary's being one of them. The housing front, we've been able to build a significant number of housing units, but we've also built a good portion of those have been for older adults, which, you know, we're desperately in need of. So, you know, there's a lot that I think we could have done, and there's a lot that we have done that, you know, we will be sharing with the community in our last few months in office, because I want them to be proud of the work that we've done. And it's not easy. It's not for, you know, the faint of heart. But we really have shown, you know, like I really love this district, and I have been very purposeful in how I address not only the quality of life issues, but how, you know, I'm ensuring that we're bringing in things that are gonna allow this community to prosper and not, you know, stay stagnant.
When working in public service, it's important to look on your past accomplishments with pride while also looking towards the future with confidence. And that being said, what would you like to see as some long-term goals for District 8?
Yeah, I mean, obviously more investments, because you know, again, when we go back again, and this is like it is a really good point in terms of like the fair share. We are not growing anything, right? we are maintaining and we're helping people, but we're not growing. We're not allowing the community to grow. We need to be able to attract good businesses, small businesses, things, programs and services that help educate, our children, providing, workforce opportunities for them and pipelines, into different industries. Those are the things that, I look forward to. And those are the things that I think legislatively and fiscally we've been prioritizing. We've been prioritizing maternal health, health being a huge factor, right? How are we funding Lincoln Hospital? Our public hospitals are really outdated, and the equipment is very outdated. And so people go in there and they equate that with the quality of, healthcare that they're going to receive. And it's, we have really good doctors there. But we need to, as a city, do more. We need to do better about ensuring that these spaces are reflective of the people that live here, and that they're beautiful and inviting, and that when people go in there, they feel loved.
Overall, the Bronx community is all about this sense of solidarity. I see people helping out one another, strangers carrying up strollers for people they've never met. It's really a beautiful thing. And that being said, what does the Bronx community mean to you?
The world. I have been very, very lucky. I've made lifelong friends in the district, and they're like my family. And I genuinely mean that. My constituents are an extended part of my family. I go to funerals, I go to birthdays, I visit them in their homes when I'm invited to, and I share the good times and the bad times with them. It's a beautiful community. It's full of love, full of vibrancy. People are so happy, even with their struggles. They find reasons to be happy, and I love that. I love that for them. I love it for me, and I'm just eternally grateful to have been able to represent such a diverse and yet such a culturally rich district.
They stay Bronx strong.
That's right.
Always.
That's right. All the time.
Well, that is going to do it for us. Thanks everybody for watching, and remember, you can always watch this program anytime, anywhere on BronxNet.org and our YouTube channel. And while you're there, be sure to follow BronxNet on social media to find out who will be our next community leader that we'll sit down with on In the District. From BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios at La Central in South Bronx with Councilmember Diana Ayala, I'm Chris Cumella. Talk soon.